Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with the 31 days of cop films and gangster films from the year 1970 to the present day. And for purposes of today's video, for today and specifically today's video, or this video, I'd like to focus in on the gangster film genre element of that 31 days discussion. And so in that spirit, I have a film which is a highly regarded film, a very special film from an incredibly special and very significant and popular name in the current landscape of cinema artists. And this is a film that just was shocking as it was monumental. You could feel the earth move, the earth of say, cinema lovers and the whole environment of cinema. Movie-going fans, their lives changed because of just how impactful, one could say, the announcement and the emergence of this film was and is. And we can still feel those reverberations and echoes to this present day due to the fact that we have, as I say, at the heart of this, a very special and incredibly significant filmmaker at work early on in his career, as well as having the film itself being so clever and so surprising and so filled with shocks and spills and thrills, but done in this almost nouvelle vague type of way that's also relying on or paying tribute or homage to many elements of the cinematic past while forging its own path independently, fiercely, and with a type of confident abandon and a sense of true genius at work for all the filmmakers concerned. So this is a film that is very special indeed, and I know I'm not the only one who thinks that. This has a huge following. It has so back in the day, and it still continues with that following to this present day. And I'm speaking of a work from 1992. It's described as being from 1992, and it has now regarded as an iconic cast, a real iconic gathering of performers. For example, Lawrence Tierney and Michael Madsen and Tim Roth and Steve Buscemi and Chris Penn and Harvey Keitel and others. This is the work from writer-director Quentin Tarantino, and the name of the work is Reservoir Dogs. Reservoir Dogs is a crime heist caper film that involves at its core, or primarily speaking, it is involving a set of characters having to do with the criminal life. They could be described as gangsters or maybe part of some kind of crime or criminal organization to a certain degree anyway. And so for that purpose, I'm going to discuss this film, or I want to have this film in the discussion or context of the gangster crime film component of the 31 days. But this is if we interpret that term liberally or broadly, we can still find plenty of room for the discussion of a film like Reservoir Dogs. And I think that's a great occasion to do so, because this is an electrifying work that remains ever so electrifying even after the years have passed since its initial release in '92. So we have at the center here a number of characters that are involved, or through some a series of machinations and planning and pre-planning, are or become involved or attempt to become involved in the committing of a heist crime. And we see, or we hear, or we assume a lot of the details building up to such committing of the crime, including the planning, the plotting, the gathering of the participants, and this becomes part of the process of the film. This film is about many things, one of such things being the actual procedure of the build-up and the steps leading up to the crime, including meeting the people that will become directly participatory in the committing of the act. And so we have what is now is a very famous and iconic way in which characters are introduced, and indeed also the naming of the characters as well, in terms of the colors, Mr. Orange, Mr. Brown, Mr. Pink, Mr. White, etc., etc. So this becomes a really, this has become almost part of the, or not almost, it has become a very indelible part of the modern day cinema, grammar, or language when it comes to crime caper films, and also the spirit of American independent cinema in the hands of filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino, etc. So that is one way in which this film, I think, is very significant and very important. Also, in terms of how indelible a lot of these images are, it has a lot to do with how the story is being told. You know, this is a film about the gathering of criminals, the gathering of a group that is for the purpose of committing a crime. And then we also see the aftermath of such crime being committed, whether it's successful or it is not so successful. Those are a number of the details, the key plot details that emerge, indeed, quite early on when the film opens after its opening credits. And so we get these details early on, and we realize that we are in for this mystery film that is about who might have betrayed the group, if indeed someone has betrayed the group. What are the situations as for the people after the crime has been committed? Who is alive? Who is not alive? Who is injured? What has happened to everyone else? Where is Plan B when Plan A has failed? And who can we trust? Are we able to trust the people that we have met and we think we know, but perhaps now that we think about it, we've only known them for such a short period of time? Or indeed, is loyalty truly thicker than blood? And if that's the case, is the type of loyalty that we see or that we might get a sense of in a film like Reservoir Dogs, in a story like Reservoir Dogs, is it indeed running thicker than blood? Or if blood is actually shed, and if there's blood spilt, what happens to that loyalty component, if indeed it was ever there to begin with? And so that, I think, becomes part of the mystery or allure of the film. Now, this is, I think, beautifully and poetically compounded and made exponentially realized by a number of factors. Well, first of all, we have the incredible grace of the examination of these plot points via a use of, say, chronology, the way in which information is presented to us. It might be said to be, or might seem to be, type of chronological linear fashion, but then it breaks up, and so that linear fashion becomes beautifully haphazard, and so we might jump back and forth from time period to time period to reveal what information has been hitherto withheld from us. And that withholding, or that revelation of hitherto withheld information, creates this idea of surprise and shock, and then further adds multi-dimensional levels and layers of suspense. Because once we have this hitherto withheld information now revealed to us, all the scenes that we see from then on potentially change from our perspective. So that becomes this really poetic way in which chronology is employed, and how that has the potential of not just changing our viewpoint of the plot, but also changing in the way in which our engagement, we the viewers, might react when we watch the film going forward. So that's one way in which this film becomes ever so compelling and a brilliant and very enticing and intriguing work. In that way, and the way in which these jumps in time occur is very clever and very, very timely. The time jumps are very timely, as a manner of speaking. That's one aspect. The other aspect, too, is the way in which, and it's related to the idea of withholding or showing information. There are really some brilliant surprises in how this film approaches what might otherwise be described as, as being, quote unquote, expectations of the genre. end quote. And what I mean by this is there are moments of real surprise as to how Quentin Tarantino and company make their choices as to what scenes to actually show us versus what scenes are left not shown, and thus they are inferred or implied or otherwise they're spoken of by people after the fact on screen. So we get a sense of the information of the story and plot. Sometimes those key details are presented to us directly in the form of an actual direct scene that depicts those particular circumstances, or it could be indirect. And the choices that are made as to which pieces of information within the context of this heist crime caper plot, which pieces of information are shown to us directly versus which pieces of information are withheld from us. That is, I think, another great source of surprise and engagement and entanglement, as well as this notion of being on one's toes as a viewer, because that also adds a level of tension and suspense. Because if, for example, we as viewers are maybe through a series of points of plot that, say, are withheld from us, the sudden burst of a direct showing of information can be quite sudden and quite shocking indeed. And let's say, as an example, there might be instances where the filmmakers decide to withhold direct depictions of violence against persons. And so we might see or hear about it through dialogue, or you might see the aftermath of something that has occurred to a particular character, and then we see how various other characters respond to that situation at the moment. But it's always after the fact in those certain circumstances. But then suddenly we might see a burst, some kind of burst of energy or action or violence or something similar to that burst forth on screen. And so that means that this idea of withholding or showing us whatever it is that's the point of that particular point of the film, that can create a real, a hyper-realized sense of tension and suspense in the hearts and minds of the viewers. So that, I think, is so well applied, and it makes this film such an on-edge viewing experience as it always has been. So that's another, I think, compelling aspect of this. And I mentioned too the way in which this film is acting like it's acting in many ways, in borrowing from different genres, paying homage and tribute to different genres, while also forging its own path forward in an interesting and intriguing way. And that has, I think, a lot to do with how it reveals or shows information. And so, for example, we might be in a particular location, like a warehouse or abandoned warehouse or something, where we are, focusing on the characters and the characters trying to get their bearings as to what happened and who's who and what's what, etc. So sometimes we might have a film that is a crime caper film, but is taking place almost entirely in a particular setting here and there. So it has this way of not just presenting or withholding or showing information, but also presenting the drama in an intriguing and sometimes surprising way, almost like a stage play or a chamber work, or maybe in the context of murder mysteries. I know it's not completely, I know what I'm about to say is not 100% I think, a tried and true metaphor that could be applied to Reservoir Dogs, but for the most part, and I think from a certain perspective, it could also be said to be almost like a locked room mystery in a manner of speaking. And so we have all these various, as well as the notion of, say, a type of a film noir, pulp fiction, crime story, a type of aesthetic, which is also borrowing from Italian cinema, French Nouvelle Vague cinema, and also great staples of, say, Hollywood, a crime, American cinema, and other places, other sources, etc., etc. So this is, and also theater and literature, etc. So this is a real great combination of these various sources, and I think that's a testament to the real craft and genius of an artist like Quentin Tarantino, artist, filmmaker, director, writer Quentin Tarantino. And he is even now very famous for those traits and others, of course. One of those traits that he is so well known for, obviously, is the way that he's presenting information, that he sets up scenes. And not only do you have that set up in terms of the chronology, but also in the way in which we have the presentation. The presentation here is, in a brilliant way, quite theatrical. In other words, it feels very stage bound. But that is part of the point. That is part of the point because that also plays into our idea of expectations into the genre and actually disrupting those expectations in a bold and vivid and imaginative way, thus paving the way for the notion of this film being, on the one hand, relying on in a loving way past tried and true cinematic legacy traits or points or movements, and so paying tribute to, or paying homage to those great points, cinematic legacies on the one hand, while also forging its own new and bold, inventive path forward in an independent spirit way. So that is another thing too. And then I spoke about the dialogue and Quentin Tarantino's writing. And so here he is known, very deservedly so, for the brilliance and cleverness of his writing and dialogue. And here is another great exception, or perhaps in terms of this film being regarded as his feature film directorial debut, we have all the traits of that here. And I know that the traits of that exist throughout the entirety of his feature film catalog, filmography. And it's here so open, so filled with vigor and life, undeniable in terms of its top-notch, high-caliber level of supreme supreme craft in terms of the writing and the dialogue. And it is also due to the great performances. We have so many great performances, each with their own idiosyncratic ways of approaching the character. I mentioned, for instance, the performance made by, say, Steve Buscemi, who was very, he's so memorable in this. Michael Madsen, same thing, so memorable in this. Tim Roth, same thing, so memorable. Harvey Keitel and others, Chris Penn, others. There's just the way in which they perform their characters in their own unique, individualized, quirky ways, also revealing what they are concerned about, what they are not concerned about, little details or quirks of, say, observation about life and art or music, or, for example, maybe there's a very famous speech at the very opening of the film involving tipping waiters or waitresses at restaurants or eating establishments, or also the idea of interpretation of a song, here being the very, I think, famous dialogue or monologue in terms of a Madonna song. And incidentally too, we have Quentin Tarantino, who is behind the camera and also to a certain degree in front of the camera as well. This is to say that the performances here are iconic and brilliant. And also to add to that, the legend of this film, the legendary status of this film, we have the look, the suits and the glasses and the ties and the way in which they are just dressed to the occasion, and what occasion that is. It's filled to the brim with violence, mayhem, and chaos, that's for sure, but they still look quote unquote cool. And we also have the application, as we do with all of Tarantino's work, the great application of music that is inventive and really startling upon initial watch, but then it automatically becomes part of the pop cultural landscape. That's how much of an impact Reservoir Dogs and the use of music and other films by Quentin Tarantino had and have in the present tense. And so this is therefore a film that is operating on all cylinders and many points all at once. And it delivered when it was first released, and it still delivers it to this very day. And I remember when this had come out, I wasn't of an age where I could see it in the theater upon its initial release, because I was still too young to be able to go to the theater to watch a film like Reservoir Dogs on my own, or to be permitted to go into the theater by the theater establishment owners or the people who worked at the theater, etc. But I would always hear about the film, and I'd hear about people who had seen it, and they'd be around me, and they'd be just lauding and aspects of this film, just talking to no end and praising this film, just how startling and wonderful it was. And so the legend of the film built up in me, and then when I finally was able to catch up with it, I was really surprised. It took me to places where I wasn't expecting, and that is almost diverting the way in which the drama was being presented. And I was totally caught off guard by these aspects, while at the same time, while being caught off guard, I was suddenly hooked back into how it then fulfilled those genre expectations and then subverted them and then turned it into this huge concoction of cinematic brilliance. So, Reservoir Dogs. This is the film for discussion today in the 31 days. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.